Finkelstein is just like, nowadays they want me to call a woman a man. Isn't that crazy? He's best if you pretend that part doesn't exist. No, the problem with Finkelstein is what happened to him is he was like actually a victim of cancel culture. He lost so much for his pro-Palestine stance, but he erroneously came to identify with the fake cancel culture claims on the right. And because cancel culture, whatever the fuck that word means, it actually happened to him. He lost tenure over it, and he ended up having to work at like random universities in Turkey for like 20 years for being pro-Palestine, for saying things that were right, but that he wasn't allowed to say. And he sort of erroneously identified his predicament with people who are just making shit up. Like, can't even talk about the love between a man and a woman on campuses anymore. Everyone's gay now. I can't even speak up about like how I want to remove women's bodily autonomy without getting shouted down by a bunch of dyed hair leftists or whatever. It's like this confusion of conservative cultural ideas no longer being as widely accepted among the public as they used to be, and conservatives being criticized for them and shouted at for them. There's this confusion between that and the institutional censorship of anti-Israel people, which is actually what happened to Finkelstein. They're not even remotely alike. You know, the people screaming at those conservatives are right. The people who hated Finkelstein are wrong. So I think overall he went looking for like something to identify with, like a situation through which to understand his own predicament, and he just failed to identify why it happened to him and how it happened to him, and how that is qualitatively incredibly different to the sort of people who he has erroneously put himself in with. Because Norman Finkelstein was not cancelled because he wouldn't say there were 300 genders or whatever, you know? No one has ever been cancelled for that ever. In fact, most people have never been cancelled for anything. The only people who have ever been anything remotely close to cancelled are people who say things that are against American imperialist interests, like Finkelstein has. And yeah, I doubt he's like technologically competent enough, or like turned on to technology enough to even really fully get a grasp of the subject that he's talking about. He probably just gets it from like a newspaper or something. He's like that kind of old guy. He was not on Twitter. He has a team. No, Finkelstein has a team who manages social media of young kids. They post his statements. He doesn't actually read shit himself. That's the thing. He lives in a bubble of like paper media still. He never adapted. And I also think that is part of why he's the way that he is. So I think like he also hasn't gotten the full picture, right? All he knows of is like the bullshit narrativizing around this stuff rather tand the facts. Like blue-haired they-thems are yelling at conservatives on campus. This is cancel culture. Their free speech is being shut down or whatever. And he's like, my free speech was shut down too. Failing to understand the qualitative difference in every single way between these two situations. So that's what I think. That's why I think he ended up being this way. Still very useful. He's like a nuclear missile for us, for Palestine. So I don't really care. Like the shit that he says about like, isn't it weird? You got to use the wrong pronouns these days or whatever the fuck it is. It has qualitatively absolutely no effect on anything. It's just giving people a reason to hate him, if anything. But what his advocacy for Palestine absolutely does have a real effect on stuff. There'll probably be a day, 50 years in the future or whatever, where I'm like Norman Finkelstein, where like things have changed and I refuse to acknowledge it. I refuse to adapt. Like, I don't know, 50 years from now, probably the kids are going to think that the USA is a progressive force for good. And I'll be sitting there in my chair in like my heavily guarded cell in solitary confinement in the conquered Argentine state of the Argentine territory of the American Empire, in my like 10-minute a day allowed usage of social media, tweeting it into the wind about how the kids are actually wrong and the Americans are bad. That's my future.